G'day guys, and welcome to our Everything Exmouth seminar. Tonight we're going to be running through a bunch of different topics on fishing Exmouth. We're going to give you some tips from our fishing experiences that we've had. So we'll get stuck into it.
Alright, so we've got a few topics to cover. I'm going to cover a land-based sort of section, and then later on there'll be a bit of gulf fishing from the shore, from the boat, as well as island fishing out in the Marions and beyond. And as well as a bit of Marlin fishing as well for the guys that want to give it a go. So with land-based fishing, obviously there's a huge amount of area to cover there. I'm just going to tell you a few different areas that I go to that's work quite well for me, as well as how to go about fishing it.
And what species that you can catch.
Yep. So first one is Biggie Flats. Biggie Flats is quite a nice area to go to if you like to just walk around the water and take the relaxing sort of fishing. It does involve you do need some gear to start with, particularly like footwear. Always wear like closed footwear because you never know what you're going to stand onto. Could be stonefish, could be just anything that's just in the water is going to stab you. So once you got that sorted, getting there is quite easy, but also easy to miss the track as well. So as you can see here, as you're travelling along Marion Road, heading towards the Lighthouse Bay and the Mildura Wreck, just before the turn off at Yardie Creek, there's a track here that goes along off the road. It's basically a compressed, or basically a graded dirt track. It takes you right to the end there. Once you get to the end, you know you're at Biggie Flats because there's a large sign there that says, on the north it will say, you can't fish, it's an open area to fish. On the south is a sanctuary zone. So obviously you fish on the north side of the sign. You can fish that area from low tide or from high tide. I prefer to fish from low tide, hanging basically towards the bottom of the tide. So you're walking out as the tide goes out, and then fish, and the tide turns, you'll see like the bait fish will actually start heading the other way towards the shore, and then you start working your way back. So that way you're not stranded in waist deep water. With a lot of sharks around you.
It's actually quite a good spot as well on a high tide. If you come right up to the point where you'll be able to see on the screen, if you come right up to the very end point, you get quite a lot of queenies and reasonable sized queenfish up on the point. So on a high tide, if you walk all the way up there and you throw some stick baits, things like these nomad riptides, you can throw little medals, you can throw little poppers, but they're the kind of things I'd be throwing. And yeah, right on that end point. Another thing on the high tide that's quite good also is the yellowfin whiting and the brim. Now you'll get them all along the shoreline, but I've had success in close along the rocks here, just at the entrance to Bundigi. And yeah, just small little things, lures with brim gear is all you need.
Yeah, like I said, gear wise, doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just something like what you normally use down here for your herring and all that stuff. 8 pound, 10 pound, it's all you need. Maybe up to as much as like 15 pound, and then fishing there can be quite good.
One thing, if you're going to drive your car up along this beach though, be very careful. It does get quite soft up towards the end. I've almost been bogged there a couple times, but yeah, you can drive up there, but just be careful. Make sure you have low pressure on your tyres. So the next spot we're going to talk about is, well, that's the turn-offs.
Yeah, so the first one's here, just in case if you missed it, right next to the turn off to Yardie Creek Road. Instead of turning left, there's a right-hand turn, another dirt road that takes you back to Bundigi Point as well.
So the next spot is Oysters, which is a pretty popular land-based spot. There's a lot of different species get caught from there. It's actually a really good spot, but it's one of those spots that you can fish a lot of times and not catch anything. You really want to be making sure that you're fishing it at the prime times to maximise your chances of actually catching fish.
Yeah, particularly the tide level. So always fish on an incoming tide towards high tide, or if you can't make that, at least fish at the highest tide possible. That area there is also well known for GTs as well, so if you like to target that kind of fish, obviously just take minimum amount of gear with 80 pound gear. Always take a bottle of water with you. and yeah, just basically just get onto it.
There's they catch a lot of queenfish there. GTs do get caught. You get spanglies. I've actually hooked cobia on manta rays there, underneath manta rays were there before. I know guys that have caught Spanish mackerel from there. There's plenty of sharks. You do get a fair variety of species to target from there. Golden trevally, brassy trevally. It really is, it's kind of like a highway, this spot. But you really want to maximise the times you're fishing there to fish that rising high tide. What lures would you use? Well, same kind of thing as before. Things like the Nomad Riptides, the Mad Scads. I've got quite a few customers that like to use cruising lures. So pencil poppers like these. This is a ocean-born flying pencil. These are actually a really good lure for it, but there's a variety of different styles of lure like this. These Nomad Chug Norrises, metal lures like the Raiders and the Knights. Anything like that, you're generally gonna catch fish on. What kind of outfit would you use?
You can use anything between 30 pound and obviously up to 80 pound if you're chasing GTs. I like to take 2 rods with me, 30 and 50. 50 just for the bigger stuff. Obviously, like I've done 80 pound catch fish. Definitely take the lighter gear. How to get in there? It's not actually that hard to get in there. So it's actually off the end of Mildura Wreck. At the car park there, there's a turn off to the right. Bear in mind that it is dirt track and it is pretty much at water level, sea level. So if it's been raining the week before, do not go in there, you will get bogged. Otherwise, you can actually park there and basically walk the shoreline along there as well. But for the better spots, they're actually like halfway along and all the way to the end there, because all that area there is basically limestone ledges, and on the end there it comes off to a beach.
This is one spot you definitely want to have a pair of rock hoppers for. Or wear footwear, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason why they call it Oyster Reef, full of oysters.
A lot of the guys, I know quite a lot of customers that actually go GT fishing there on a full moon at night, and they've done quite well. You do catch some big GTs there, but like I said, it's a highway spot, so you never really know exactly what you're going to get there. You could get anything, but yeah, give that a shot. Next spot, Lighthouse Bay.
Lighthouse Bay is just around the corner. I'll park here, just pick one and basically start fishing from there. So the area there, it's mostly limestone ledges as well. Obviously wear closed footwear, if otherwise also wear your rock hopper boots. It's a great little spot for hunting for bluebone grouper.
Yeah, this spot is actually really good. I fish it on a high tide. The swell, I find you've got to make sure there's a low swell, because if the swell's pumping, it makes it really hard. It dirties the water up and it makes it really hard to actually catch the fish. So you want to be fishing on a high tide with low swell and clear water. The fish will actually sit right up close to shore, and what you'll see, because you've got a little bit of elevation standing on the rock ledge, you'll see there's all little holes and the fish will come in and out of the holes. One thing, there's also a lot of parrotfish there as well. So what I've found, you can tell the difference, but yeah, I just pretty much walk along with, I go and catch crabs, unweighted crabs, or even like a really lightly weighted soft plastic, and you'll spot a blue bone. And what you'll want to do is actually cast maybe a meter and a half in front of where he's actually going to be swimming. You don't want to be casting your lure or your soft plastic directly on his head, because they're quite a flighty fish, they'll spook. So make sure you cast your lure or your plastic in the direction they're going to go, and it's kind of a 50-50 whether the fish is actually going to head that way, and take what you're offering.
Crabs. If you want to catch crabs for bait, they're easy to catch. I usually go down to Bundigi Beach down there in the evening, take a little ice cream container with you or some kind of container and a little bit of bait, dig a hole in the sand, put the container down and a bit of bait down, and give it like half an hour to an hour, and soon there'll be a couple of crabs in there. Obviously the longer you leave it, the more crabs you got to get in there. And they're fun to catch.
I haven't caught crabs as much as Honsu's caught crabs before, but when I've caught them, I just walk along actually the rock walls here, and I don't normally just have like a gidgee, and I just kind of gidgee them. But yeah, you get those black and green rock crabs, and yeah, you crush them. You can either crush them up as a bit of burley and throw them in if you see some blue bone around the area, but normally, yeah, you cut it in half, put it on a lightly weighted hook, and throw it out. One thing with this type of fishing and this type of fish is you kind of got to fish heavy gear. So when you're fishing with a soft plastic, it's kind of hard because you're generally only fishing 20 to 30 pound gear. When I'm fishing with crabs, I've normally got like a 50 pound, 7-8 foot kind of rod with a heavy 120 pound leader, and on a nice decent hook. So you can actually, once you hook them, I mean, they pull like hell. So you'll probably land a lot more fish on bait, but you definitely will catch them on lures. If you are going to fish with soft plastics, things like the snapback grubs work really well. They do like a 4-inch curly tail. The snap, what are they?
The chase bait crabs as well.
Chase bait crabs.
They're lightly weighted. They're perfect size for them as well.
The Z-Man, I meant Z-Man grubs, sorry. The Z-Man paddlers and the jerk minnows, they all work really well. And you just put them on a really lightly weighted jig head. It needs to be like maybe a 1/4 ounce jig head, maybe even like a 1/6. You want it really light because you're only fishing, up to 1.5 meters of water. Like it's really shallow. So, and it's not just blue bone that you'll catch here either. I've seen bonefish being caught from here, but you'll get bludger trevally, you'll get golden trevally. They get queenfish along here. I've heard of people catching mackerel there before. You will get a bit of variety there. You'll also get spanglies and that, but every time I've fished it, I've really only ever targeted the blue bone. So, yeah, if you want to catch blue bone in a spot that's close to town, it's not too far, it's got easy access, give it a shot.
Alright, our next spot here, it's again, it's a bit more around the corner and it's a bit further south from the tip as well. Just before Tanabiti boat ramp, there's a number of access areas there. This is one of my favorite areas to fish for queenfish, as well as large queenfish, as well as a number of trevallies. Keeps your feet dry as well. So you can pick any of these access spots to park. Preferably, I usually start from that one because it means like, if it's a southerly blowing, at least I got a bit of cover to fish right on the tip there and just cast across. Now this spot here only has fish on the incoming tide. So at the bottom of the tide, there's literally next to no water there. There's only about a half meter to a meter of water at high tide. This area here, it's all ledges. The rocks there are quite sharp and a lot of holes as well. So be careful there. Wear closed footwear as well as rock hoppers if you got them. Once you come around the corner here, it levels out a bit more and it gets a bit lower, so you're a bit closer to the water. This is the sort of areas I like to use like very shallow diving minnows or poppers. The fish react to them quite well. Particularly like something like that.
The Nomad.
Yeah. I go relatively heavy gear in terms of for lighter sort of gear, 15 to 20 pound braid, and yeah, basically cast something like that, or even a lure like that as well, a shallow diving minnow. So yeah, and the queenfish usually comes in schools. If you miss them, they usually come back around and another half an hour later. So don't think you've seen people caught fish and you've missed out. Just stay there for another hour and you'll find fish again. Main thing is just keep moving. So that's why I like to start from here and just work my way back up to here and then back to the car park again. So yeah.
Right, we'll move on to the next spot. Pilgrimana.
Alright, Pilgrimana is another one of my favourites. It is quite a fair way into the national park on the other side. I think it's about 45 minutes into the national park. So what it is, this area here, it's good for a number of variety of fishing. So depending on which way you go from the car park, which is here,
go away dog,
will depend on what sort of fishing you want to do. If you walk north of the little stream here, it's a really good spot for spotting for blue bone groper. Yeah, same thing, you can either use lures or plastics, and you're standing on these little points here where you can actually get up and just look down to the water. It's quite interesting that middle of the day you actually see them free swimming around everywhere. They can be as little as about 30 centimeters or as big as 80 centimeters. But fishing for them, heavy gear, like the other spot, 50 pound braid with at least 100 pound to 120 pound leader. I tend to use about that heavy as well with the crabs. Lures fishing, pretty much the same. So that's bluebone grouper, bluebone fishing there. Now it's not just bluebone fishing there as well. So you find like it's a bit mundane, just stop waiting for a bluebone to bite. You can fish for other fish there as well. They do get not that it's enjoyable catching them, but they do get quite large barracuda swimming through there. Otherwise, there's queenfish that do go through there. Quite a number of different trevallies, like your small golden trevallies, GTs, and as well as the occasional bludger trevally as well. The bludger trevally is a bit different. They're a bit shorter, longer, but they pull like hell. If you decide you want to go for a nice walk along the beach south of the point there, that's a good spot just for basically just fishing light gear, 10 pound to 15 pound. It's either cast plastics, like there's 4-inch paddle tails here from Z-Man.
So I'll give you a look at these. That's the...
Yep, that's the soft plastics of choice.
I have the little curly tails.
Hang on. I think we lost that for a second. There we go. Alright, so it's all beach there, or basically very shallow sort of area. There's a little bit of rocky sort of terrain there, but it's pretty much at water level. And yeah, that's a good spot for soft plastics. So you find like there's not a lot of rocky bottom, but main thing is to fish any structures or any dips in the holes through here. So that's a good spot to basically fish your lures into as well. Always fish there with a moving tide, be it the bottom of the tide or a high tide. As long as it's moving, there's always fish passing through this little channel here.
It's actually, I know quite a few guys have caught GTs there.
Yeah, there's a knowing spot for GTs, as well as bonefish. But yeah, bonefish is a little bit harder to spot there because being crystal clear sort of sand. So I usually just avoid them. Let's just chase other fish I can catch.
Right, so we'll move on to the next spot. Right, now we're going to talk about fishing the Gulf, and this is boat fishing. So the Gulf is actually really good option, especially if it's blowing hard on the west side. I've had some fantastic fishing in the Gulf. There's tuna, there's coal trout, there's mackerel, there's sailfish, queenfish, heaps of trevallies. I mean, there's heaps of fishing to do in the Gulf. What we're gonna talk about though is just some of the fishing that I normally do when I'm in there. Now I like to fish the shoals. Now, as you can see on the screen, I've marked a number of shoals that I find to be pretty productive whenever I head to Exmouth. We've also marked Whalebone Island. That's another good little spot to go and fish. But with these shoals, what are you going to catch? So generally I target coal trout with soft plastics. I also get a lot of brassy and golden trevally. They're generally when I go and fish these, they're generally the main targets that I want to catch. You'll also catch queenfish on them. You'll get mackerel trolling around the outside. Those further ones for me seem to be a bit more productive. But Cooper's Shoal, that's actually, it's only about 6 miles from the marina, 7 miles. It gets hit pretty hard, but there is a lot of fish on it. It is worth having a flick on your way out to some of these other ones. The kind of gear that I use, normally only use like a 20 pound, 30 pound spin rod, light 40, 50 pound leader, and same kind of thing with the plastics. I'm only fishing really small, 4 to 6 inch soft plastics on really lightly weighted jig heads. It's only, I think on the top of the shoals, they're generally around about 4 or 5 meters from memory, and then they drop off to about 10 or 12. So what I normally do is I'll sound around the shoal. I'll go up and over the edge, and I'll find where the fish and the bait are sitting, and then I'll go and do drifts, and I'll just bounce my plastic slowly over the bottom. Plenty of times I've come up to some of these shoals and you'll see birds working all around the outside. You'll see bait busting up. It's well worth trolling, if you want to catch mackerel, it's well worth trolling a bibbed lure around the outside of the, like right on the drop off where all the bait sits. You'll catch heaps of mackerel, sharkies. You get those bloody horrible school mackerel, but you get good Spaniards there. Things like these Nomad DDX minnows, these are probably one of the better trolling lures, but yeah, you know, just troll something around the outside. If you're going to cast lures, generally any stick baits, you can, you know, I've caught quite a few Queenfish on some of these as well, but just small stick baits or metals or poppers, they'll work over the top. Now the other spot that I talked about before is Whalebone Island. Now that's actually a pretty good little spot I've found for just small species. I've fished it generally when there's just a bit of tidal movement, with little poppers and little stick baits and soft plastics as well. But I've always just found I've caught little jacks, I get a lot of big eye trevally, get small queenfish there, just a mixture of different kind of species. I tend to fish, when you actually go up to it, there's like a sand, it'll be on the southern side, there's like a sandbar, but I like to fish the rocky ledge on it'd be the southwestern side of it, kind of up to the sandbar. And as long as you've got tidal movement, every time I've gone there and there's been some form of tidal movement, I've caught fish. When I've gone there on a dead tide, it's never been very productive for me. But that's a spot that's, you know, if you're in the Gulf, you want to fish somewhere different, give it a shot because it's quite good. Then one other thing I will say as well, there's a few, if you want to catch like big queenfish, you can come over to the other side of the Gulf and fish these, the mouths of the creeks on a high tide. If you actually just cruise along, it's only shallow, you're only fishing like a metre to, you know, maybe 2 meters of water. Super shallow, but you'll just, I've seen queenies just cruising out the front of the river mouths or the creek mouths, and you just go and throw soft plastics, same as these, the little paddle tails or the jerk minnows, and I've had some great fun there doing that.
Right, so the next sort of fishing we're going to talk about, it's up in the islands, which is generally the northeast of the tip of Exmouth. Luke will take us about this.
When I go to Exmouth and I do a lot of my jigging, I spend a lot of time around the islands, and I don't fish deep at all. I fish relatively shallow. So we have the North Marion Island. This is just an indication of roughly where to fish. I mean, every time I fish this ground, I normally mark new ground, and I fish new spots constantly. But this will give you an idea of roughly where to look. This is where I've had success. So here's the North Marion Island. This water out here is the kind of like 50 to 100 meter mark. It's a really good spot. I've found I've got a lot of ranking in this area. I've gotten reds, gold band. You do get a lot of like bludger kind and different trevally species when you're jigging on the bottom there. But it is quite a good spot for a variety of fish. The only problem here is the sharks can be bad. So what I normally do, I'm only jig fishing, so I'm not fishing with bait. So what we'll do is we'll mark a spot, we'll do 1 or 2 jigs on it, you know, hopefully catch some fish, then we'll just keep moving because sometimes here the sharks can be really bad. What I do like to fish though is this area out around Flat and Long Island. This is generally, well, what I generally fish is kind of 15 to 30 meters of water, with little jigs and soft plastics. And what I do is I'll just go on, or I'll be driving along and I'll literally just keep marking spots as I see them on the sounder. Everything that I see on the sounder, if it's like a pinnacle, I just mark it and I'll come back around and I'll have a look. I reckon I've probably got a couple of 100 spots marked on my GPS just in this small area, because there's literally that much good ground throughout there. Same thing in the shallow water. You get rankin, trout, good spanglies, you get heaps of coronation trout. I do get reds, not like a heap of reds, but I do get a few reds through there. Long nose emperors. Another thing as well I'll say that you get through there, I've caught a few of, is cobia. Yeah, I've caught quite a few cobia on jigs there. So That's just an area that's worth looking at if you want to try and do some jigging around the islands.
Now that's quite a long place to go, isn't it? You know, because
that's
it's way past, like, well, it's not way past, but it's a bit further than Peak Island. So obviously, guys that want to fish a bit more there, you can actually stay on different areas of the island itself. It's not easy to get into it, but you know, if you want to fish there a bit more, particularly if if you get shark all the time, you just want to get a bit more grounds there. It's good to basically stay out there overnight and then start again the next morning.
It's about 30. I think from memory, from Bundigi Ramp to Long, it's around about 33 miles. And like Hansu was saying, I generally, whenever I fish out there, I will normally stay overnight. It's a long way to go, but if you stay overnight as well, you're able to keep 2 days bag limit. So generally, as long as the weather's good, I'll always go and stay at least for 1 night. And it's great staying at Long. You've got two, you can stay either side of the island in 2 protected, semi-protected bays. They're great to stay in. If you're traveling all that way, you may as well stay the night. So next.
Right, so what's next?
These are just some of the things I tend to look for when I'm on the sounder when I'm fishing that area. So you can see pinnacles like this. I'm just be driving along, and you'll mark. I'd mark everything that I see like this, and you can see some of these are stacked with fish. You know, ledges. It's only shallow water, but anything that's got fish stacked on it. So they're just some images from when I've fished there, caught fish on them. Next, we've got a video.
Yep, let's play it and then.
Woo, man!
Yeah, what's that? What's that? You hold it.
Shark. Shark.
Gee.
Okay, now what gear do you need to use? So I use just my general jigging gear. P2 to 3 jigging rods, matched with 4,000 size reel. Leader line, I generally fish like 60 to 80 pound leader. The same kind of stuff that I use for dewies and snapper, and all my jigging down here, I use the same kind of outfits up there. You know, the jigs, generally I fish a bit lighter because it's quite shallow there, so I'm fishing 80 to 150 gram jigs depending on the weather. With the soft plastics, out there in that kind of stuff, I'd fish a 6 to an 8-inch soft plastic. The Z-Man make the streaks. They're really good.
Streaks XL.
They're a really good one.
Yep.
They also do these paddlers.
Paddlers in a 6-inch as well, the bigger size.
They work really good too. But yeah, just go and have a look around that area. You like mark spots. You know, if you see pinnacles, mark spots. If there's bait on them and you see fish on them, you're almost guaranteed to catch fish. There's heaps of rankin through that area, so give that a shot. Next.
Right, for the guys that's wanting to get into the hardcore fishing, GT popping, as you can see, we point out the islands itself does produce quite large fish. It does get worked quite hard there as well. Luke will show you, like, you know, roughly where to go and how to go about targeting them. Yeah, so
these are just areas where I've had success in Exmouth catching GTs. There's obviously other areas, but this is where, whenever I go out to the islands, this is kind of roughly the areas that I like to fish. So what I'll normally do if I'm going out targeting GTs for a day, I'll launch at Bundigi and I'll come straight to the South Marion and I'll work that southern area up to the sanctuary zone and then move to the little the southern tip of the North Island. I'll work that little reef along there. That's actually it's actually a really good spot in there. You generally want to be fishing this all on a high tide as well, as from what I've found. And I'll work my way around to the northern tip. That area is quite a good spot, but you just have to be a little bit careful depending on what the swell's doing. If the swell's cranking, it can be a little bit dangerous in there. I have caught some good fish in there, but I've also had some sketchy moments. Peak Island, it's another really popular spot. Everyone's probably heard about it. I found it to be really good on a high tide if you fish right in close along the rock walls, but it's actually not too bad on a low tide either, on the back end of it. I've caught a few fish just throwing poppers and skipping lures right on the back edge of it on a low tide. I've actually done reasonably well there. Flat Island, the back edge of Flat Island's pretty good on a high tide. On a low tide, there's not really a lot of water in there. I mean, you probably still would catch GTs in there on a low tide, but generally a high tide there is quite good. Long Island can be pretty productive. I normally just fish just the tip of the island. Well, that'd be the southern, probably halfway along the southern island to the tip. That's quite good on a high tide. The other popular, well, it's becoming a popular spot now, is Black Ledge. Now this is a fair hike. This is about 35, 36 miles from memory, don't quote me, but yeah, about that far from Bundegi. It's a really cool looking spot. It's just a reef in the middle of nowhere, holds GTs, holds plenty of bloody big, what are they called? Big eye trevally?
Big eye trevallies, yep.
You'll get spanglies there. I've caught queenfish there. All around the ground, all around the reef is actually really good for trout and rankin. It's just a really good spot to kind of hang around. So if you want to catch GTs, that's a rough area of where to fish. As far as gear goes for fishing it,
you want to fish at least a heavy-ish sort of 50-pound gear, if not 60, 80, because they're generally casting lures over 100 grams. Like this sort of lures is 115 grams already. That itself is 140 plus hooks, which makes it about 160 grams. Majority I like to use stick baits. You know, you get tired of basically blooping poppers all the time, but if it's a new area, I always start with the poppers. Get the fish fired up. If the fish is not fired up, but you know you've seen fish there, or the fish are tailing your lures, then you switch back to a stick bait. Stick baits just makes it easier to use and just work in long strokes. So yeah. The other lures, you know, there's a number of variety of lures as well. The other lures we recommend as well is it's quite effective lures. It's the Nomad Mad Scad as well as the Riptides. And these two lures already come with hooks, single hooks, which is great.
These are a really good lure. I've caught a lot of GTs on these. Super easy to work. They're not too expensive, and they catch fish. They really are a good one. So they're the kind of things I'd be using. I'd probably fish with stick. I fish with stick baits a lot more, just because I find Exmouth, I think the GT fishing, like it's been hit pretty hard. So I find the fish can be a little bit freakish with poppers, but it just depends. Like if the water's deeper, then definitely put a popper on. But if you're only fishing the shallows, start off with stick bait. That's my preference. But anyway, we'll move on to the next.
Right, next up we're going to talk about marlin fishing and what gear to use, what lure to use, and where to target them. So
yeah, I mean this is just going to be basic marlin fishing. Yeah, I've done a little bit around Exmouth, and I've had reasonable success. You don't need to overcomplicate it. If you just want to get into it and catch some fish, it's actually quite simple. You just want to set yourself up with the right gear. So you want to make sure you have the right kind of outfits, and you don't, like, especially with marlin fishing, if you haven't done a lot of it, you don't really need to have a lot of gear. Like normally I'll only fish with 2 or 3 rods out. You don't want to fish with too many. A lot of these guys, they put 5 rods out, 2 teasers. They make it really difficult for themselves. I'd fish, if you're just getting into it, I'd fish with 2 rods and maybe 2 teasers. It's easy to clear the deck. I mean, you're really only targeting, you only want to catch 1 fish at a time, and generally you only ever do. So what I would be fishing with is 2 different coloured lures in 2 different sizes. For small black marlin, these Richter Oscar Juniors, soft Oscars, and even the tubes are a great lure to use. They're not over the top expensive. You can buy them pre-rigged, ready to go, and you just clip them straight on. But I would just kind of get a little bit of a variety of lures that you want to try out, a couple of different colours, and just mix it up a little bit. As far as your outfits go, generally I'd fish with like a 15 to 24 kilo style rod. So generally, if you're just marlin fishing, you'd buy an actual, dedicated trolling reel with a trolling rod. But plenty of guys just put these out on their,
on their spin gear.
Yeah, on their 50 pound.
Just as long as there's sufficient line on there and it does the job. So you're not targeting massive fish. So main thing is to catch one first and just get the hang of it.
Generally, as well with teasers, a lot of people always ask, well, what kind of teaser do you use? Well, I always use a witch doctor teaser, and then generally like a spreader bar. So kind of like a spreader bar, like one of these. It's got a whole heap of squids on it. So I'll run that stays on the surface, and then my witch doctor teaser's swimming underneath. It's flashing around, it's going like crazy. So this will be on the surface, the squids will just be on top making a commotion, just attracts fish to the boat. That's keeping it simple. They're the kind of things that I use. Now, what area? So this is where I've had the most success. You can catch marlin anywhere along this whole stretch, but this is where I've had the most success. So what I'll normally do, so I'll launch a tender biddy, and if the tide's high enough, I will come down and out through the south passage and head out to these canyons. Now, I generally like to work my way back north, and another thing as well is I always like to go kind of with the swell than against the swell. So what I do is I'll normally exit out through the south passage, head out to these canyons. I kind of put the lures in the water at around about 100 meters, and then I'll troll out to around about the 300 meter line, and I'll zigzag. Now, when you zigzag, you always want to be on like a 45 degree to the direction of the waves. It'll keep your lures in the cleanest water for as long as possible. You don't want to be going directly with the waves, and you don't want to be going directly into the waves, because when you're going with the waves, you're always going to be pulsing fast and slow, fast and slow. Your lures are going to be popping in and out of the waters. Same as if you're going directly into it. It's not clean water that your lures are running on. So if you're always in 45 degrees, your lures are going to be a lot more consistently in the clean water. Now we'll move on to the next one, and that's generally blue marlin. You'll get black and stripes out in this area as well. So here's tender biddy boat ramp. Same thing applies. This whole area you will catch marlin. But for me, this is where I kind of focus my attention when I head up there. So I head out to this. I kind of put the lures in the water around the 300 meter mark if I'm targeting blue marlin. One thing I'll say as well, if you're targeting blue marlin, you generally fish with heavier outfits. I really only just fish with 37 kilo outfits. You can fish with 24 as well, but the heavier the better for this kind of fishing. Now, we'll also step up to a bigger lure. So I'd be fishing, this is the tube, but that's kind of the smallish lure that I'd be using. Up to the big kind of 13-inch style lures, you want to just go up a size in what you're using. So I'll head out to this area around the 300 meters, and you can troll as far out as you like, but I generally work this contour line, and the same thing applies. You're always working on a 45 degree to the waves. Try and work tight zigzags, or you don't want to be working like super wide, and just try and work as much ground as possible. If you see bait on the sounder, hang around the bait. If you see a change in the water temperature, mark it on your sounder and work around the water temperature change. You always just want to be searching the water for any kinds of life or any kinds of activity, and you want to be hanging around that area. I fished a spot out here, it's quite popular, called the Nut. It looks like a testicle, that's why they call it the Nut. And the amount of bait that I've seen, one day I was fishing out there, and the amount of bait that I've seen hanging just off the edge of it, and I just knew there was going to be a marlin there, and we just kept working it and working it and working it. We worked it for God, maybe 2 hours, and then we finally got a bite. We actually ended up catching 2 fish off that spot because we found a bit of activity there. So it's just about putting in the time, you know, and fishing the ground and finding bait. And
yep, the key is to find bait. The ground you look for is just where the baits are. So if you can find bait, you're on the right ground to start with.
So that gives you an indication. I'm not going to go too much further into that blue marlin fishing, but that's a rough indication if you want to just get into it. Alright guys, thanks for watching our seminar. If you want to learn more about Exmouth fishing or any fishing in general, come into the store or come to one of our events, because obviously with our events that we put on, we'll go into a lot more detail. They'll generally run for 2 to 3 hours. We have questions and there's just a lot more information to be shared. So cheers for watching.
Yeah, so follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or just Google us to find us. Yeah, just watch the blank space.
See you at the next one. Boo.